Wasn't that nice? Yeah, thank you. Well, our reading today comes from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 40, verses 21 through 31. This particular passage is one of the 4 selections from the Common Lectionary today. The message today and next Sunday both will be chosen from the lectionary. And then on the first Sunday of Lent, we're going to begin a new message series called A Different Kind of Fast. That begins the first Sunday of Lent. For now, let us turn our hearts and minds to this reading from God's Word. Have you not heard? Have you not known? Has it not been told to you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is God who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. It is God who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to live in, who brings the princes to naught and makes the rulers of the earth as nothing. Scarcely are they planted, scarcely sown, scarcely has their stem taken root in the earth, when he blows upon them and they wither, and the tempest carries them off like stubble. To whom then will you compare me? Or who is my equal, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high and see. Who created these? He who brings out their hosts and numbers them, calling them all by name, because God is great in strength, mighty in power, not one is missing. Why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God? Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. God does not grow faint or weary. God's understanding is unsearchable. God gives power to the faint and strengthens the powerless. Even youths will faint and be weary. But those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. The reading of God's Word for God's people today. I wonder if there's someone here this morning who feels faint. If there is someone here this morning who feels weary. To be weary is to be at the end of your energy. To be weary is to be at the end of your hope. To be weary is that place just before you give up and give in and burn out. If I were to define the word weary, I would define it as what happens when your energy, your stamina, your power, your heart, your soul, your body, your mind, your endurance is worn out and exhausted. It's what happens when life just grinds you down. It's what happens when you give and give and give and give, and you look around and you wonder, does anybody care as much as I do? It's what happens when you feel like you're stuck in a moment. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. When you're stuck in a moment in your life, and it's kind of a holding pattern. And you're just stuck there. It's like a Groundhog Day over and over again, and you can't see any light at the end of the tunnel. It's what happens, it's what you feel when you're trying to bring about some sort of change in the world. You want to bring about some good thing in the world. But everywhere you go, you just keep getting put down, crushed down, stomped down, put down, and you can't see the change coming. That's what it's like. The word weary here is a good Hebrew word. It's used 3 times in our passage. And the Hebrew word is the word yaga, Y-A-G-A. And what it means is, it refers to that moment when we're used up in our body and in our soul. I'm thinking of a couple I know who quit going to their church. They just gave up on their church. They'd put their whole heart, mind, soul, life into their small little church. They volunteered anytime they were asked. Yes, we'll do it, we'll go. They even did a tour of duty with the junior high. And you know the junior high. They cooked dinner for the Lenten suppers. They cooked dinners for the vacation Bible school, even though they had no kids in the program. Every Sunday you would meet them at the back door. They would greet, smile, know everybody's name, hand out the bulletins. They worked every time they had a grounds cleanup. They were there to clean up the grounds and pull weeds. And they spent weekends painting different rooms in the building. One time they volunteered to redo the nursery, to put together cribs, and to paint little beautiful murals on the wall. They went to church every single Sunday until one week they didn't. And then they missed another, and they missed another, and they missed another, because they had parents living in a faraway city, and their parents were having to transition from their home to an assisted living center. And so they had to be gone for several weekends in a row, and they weren't there to stand at the back door. But unfortunately, no one from their church called them. No one even noticed. And when they did return, it appeared no one even cared. That's weary. It's a heart thing. It's a soul thing. So let's look at your life. I know you get weary too. We all do. It says in the text that even young people get weary. It means all of us get weary. What makes you weary? What makes you tired? Could it be that you have a friendship and you just keep pouring yourself into that friend, but you never get anything back? It's just take. Or maybe you're like a lot of people in this world. You get up and you go to a job every day you don't love. It's just a way of getting up every day and making the donuts, but it doesn't feed your soul. Or maybe you're a single parent. Your husband left a long time ago, left you with 2 kids, doesn't help at all, and you're carrying heavy duty. I mean, you love your kids, but it's all you all the time. Cleaning up, washing the clothes, getting the homework done, 24/7. The life that you thought you would have isn't there because your life is gone. And you love your kids, but you're just tired. Or maybe you're like my mom. Hey Mom, my mom's listening right now. Maybe you've been stuck in your house for 10 months waiting for your vaccine, and you're still waiting for your name to be called up, and all you want to do is get that vaccine so you can drive up to Tulsa, Oklahoma, Mom, and spend some time with your kids and see your grandkids. Or maybe it's just a family conflict. You find yourself in the middle of a family conflict, and you think you're the only one in the family with a brain. And, excuse me, but there's this conflict all around you, and everybody's depending on you to straighten. You're just weary. There was a woman in my former congregation, and she had a son. She had 2 children, actually, 2 sons, and one was born with special needs. And unfortunately, this child was never able to communicate in any way, never able to speak. She was never fully aware of whether or not he had any sort of conscious ability or cognition. He was unable to walk, and it required her 24-hour-a-day, 7-day week of care. And he grew into a fully grown man to the age of 30. For more than 30 years, the life that she thought she would have was all cared for and taking care of her son. And then her son died. And then I remember seeing her sitting in the church service. Her whole life had been about caring for this son. Now she didn't know what her life was about anymore. But more than that, when I looked in her eyes, you know what I saw? I just saw a deep weariness. Well, this text from Isaiah is perfect for you if you're weary this morning. Because Isaiah knew something about weary. He was writing to a weary people. Their homeland had been destroyed. Their temple had been destroyed. They had lost their families. And now here they were living in a foreign land, exiled. If you turn over to Psalm 137, you could read the heart of the poet who was writing from Babylon. He said, "We just sat down by the river in Babylon and we just cried buckets of tears. And they asked us to sing your songs of Zion, but we couldn't sing them. How do you sing the Lord's song in a strange land? Because there is no song in our heart because we're weary. So we just took our guitars and our amps and our harps and hung them up on the willow trees. We're not going to sing anymore." And so in this passage, maybe you didn't hear it clearly, but in this passage he says, "Why do you complain, O Jacob? Why do you complain? Why do you say God does not regard our cause?" It's because they had good reason to. They thought God had either forgotten about them or did not care about them or could do nothing for them. So here in the beginning of chapter 40, God does something. God says suddenly in the book of Isaiah, which has been mostly judgment for the first 39 chapters, God says to Isaiah, "I want you to bring now a message of comfort to my people. I want you to comfort my people." And Isaiah asks a good question. "Well, God, what is it you want me to say? What can I say?" And God says this. He says, "Tell them that my word endures forever." Yeah, life is fleeting. You're like the grass of the field, you fade. You're like the flowers that wither and fade. But my word endures forever. Isaiah, what I want you to do is I want you to find the highest mountain that you can climb. I want you to climb to the top of the highest mountain. And I want you to remember something, Isaiah. You're a preacher of good news. And I've called you to bring a message of good news for the weary people. And this is what I want you to do. I want you to tell them about me. Tell them who I am. Remind them of my character. That's why over and over again he says in the text, "Have you not heard? Have you not seen? Do you not know?" He says it over and over. It's not accusatory language. He's reminding them of who God is. He's talking about the character of God. And boy, does he launch into a sermon. I mean, he preaches a powerful sermon. He says, "Don't you remember who God is? Oh, God is the one who can hold the oceans of the earth in his hands. God is the one who pushed the mountains up out of the earth and knows how much every mountain on the earth weighs because he's already weighed them on a scale. You know, God is the one who takes all the dust from the earth and holds it in a bowl. God is the one who sits above the heavens and the earth and created this whole earth and gave us a place to live in. God's above all. And when you look at these rulers who push us around like pawns on a chessboard, God's over all them too. And someday they won't be here anymore, but you know who will be? God will be. Oh, I hope you'll notice something. So often what happens when people are weary and tired, what happens? The preacher shows up like Tom Brady in the fourth quarter with a 2-minute drill and says, "Come on, you got more? You got more for those tired legs of yours? Come on, you got more." And he boosts their self-confidence. Notice what he does not do. The preacher does not try to build up their self-confidence. He does not try to boost their ego. He doesn't try to tell them to pull themselves up from their bootstraps. He says, "Let me tell you about God. Look to the stars," he says. "I know you're tired. Look to the stars and see who it is that has hung them there. And remember who you belong to and who you serve and who it is that called you. When you are undone by life and you're at the bottom of your life and you have nothing left, look up," he says. Because God is the everlasting God, infinite and eternal. Because God is the creator God who created the ends of the earth And there's nothing God can't do, and no place you can go that's out of the reach of your God. And remember that God, unlike us, God never gets tired. God never gets weary, because God is unbounded energy and life. Every day we know God is alive and real, because every day the sun comes up in the morning. God is faithful. And then he says this: God's understanding is unsearchable. Do you know what that means? It means you can get on your computer today and Google God, and you'll never get all the information that you need. In fact, if you Google God, you might even blow up the whole World Wide Web. There's an old word, an old church word. We don't use it much anymore, and it's the word omniscience. Omnipotent, omniscience, omniscient, which means God is all-knowing. God knows the past, the present, and the future. And here's the most beautiful part of this whole story. He says, at that moment when we find ourselves in our place of deepest weariness, at that moment, that God meets us where we are and gives us energy and strength. The God who created nothing from nothing, life, comes and gives us life. That's why he says in the text, those of you who will wait on the Lord, who will place their hope and confidence in God, those of you who do, will get renewed energy and renewed strength. That's a good word, because right now we need energy and strength for the world we're living in. Have you heard of Clarence Jordan? Clarence Jordan was the founder and one of the instrumental founders of Habitat for Humanity. He was a brilliant man. He had 2 PhDs. He had a PhD in Hebrew and a PhD also in Greek and also in agriculture. He could have done anything he wanted to do with his life. He could have been a successful, wealthy man. But instead he decided to move to America's Georgia and start the Koinonia Farm, which was a farm for all people. In 1940 he had a dream of building a farm for the poverty-stricken of all races, and began to invite them to his land. And over a 14-year period, they began to build a different kind of community. Now, you got to remember, 1940 was the Deep South, and he faced a lot of hostility for what he was doing, and a lot of conflict because of it. And then one day in 1954, in the dark of night, the Ku Klux Klan showed up with rifles and drove everybody off the property and burned everything they built to the ground. All that work, gone in a night. Well, then the next morning, a local reporter who happened to also belong to the Ku Klux Klan and at the same time, imagine this, was a deacon at the Methodist Church. Could have been the Baptist Church. Just happened to be the Methodist Church. Shows up on the farm and finds Clarence Jordan. What's he doing? He's not with his hands on his knees. He's out there with a hoe, just working the ground. He was the only one left in another black family, the only one left. And the reporter looked at him and mocked him and said, so 14 years all gone in one night. Would you call yourself a success? And he said, well, do you call the cross a success? He said, it's not about success. It's about faithfulness. And I believe in the faithfulness of God. And because of that, because of where he placed his hope and his trust, you know what happened? People from all over the world came to America's Georgia and helped him rebuild his farm. And not only did he rebuild his farm, but it kept going and going and going and going. And now there are homes built all over the world for people to live in who would not have a home if it were not for Habitat for Humanity. Where did he get his energy from? Where did his strength come from? A commentator who was writing that I read was telling me the story that I read about his story, said that that Clarence Jordan built the first farm on his ability, but then when he lost everything, when he came to the end of himself, it was God's ability in him that enabled him to build the farm and do that great work. I think that's what's going on here in this text. This text, what it's saying is, he's saying in the text, he said, I know you're tired. I know you're weary. It's a reality of life. Even young people will be weary and tired. Every one of us, we all get there because we're human beings. We are like the grass of the field and the flower that fades. But our God is eternal and everlasting. And if you will place your hope in God, place your confidence in God, you'll have the strength you need. Now, what that means to me is, it doesn't mean that all my problems are going to be resolved. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to be at the bottom of myself. But what it does mean is that when I do reach the end of myself, I find the everlasting God there. And though it may look like at this moment that we're not going to get where we go, but that prayer, thy kingdom come, will be done on earth as it is in heaven, it's going to happen. Because we belong to the God, the everlasting God is the creator of the ends of the earth, who never gets tired, who never gets weary. And it's all about looking up and getting perspective. Power and strength comes from perspective. That's why we worship. We gather in this room not to worship ourselves or to boost our ego, but to change our perspective and to offer ourselves to God. There's an even better part in this text. He says in here, power, the word empower from the Hebrew means strength binding itself to us. Strength binding itself to us. In other words, when we place our hope and trust in God, God's power is bound to us and strengthens us. Some of you needed to hear that today. I know that someone today is weary. Humble yourselves and place your heart and mind in God's hands. But on the other hand, I also want to say that we need to humble ourselves too, because there's a kind of weariness in the world that we're not in tune with. And what I mean by that is, let's just be honest, we have opportunities for ourselves that other people don't have. We're going to fare very well through this pandemic. Most of us have bank accounts and retirements and 401k plans, and we have opportunities and new leads and new jobs. And we got connections. If you lose a job, you know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. There's a lot of people in the world that don't have these things. We got single parents just trying to get by. We got people who don't have the education that you have. And don't go around telling everybody, I'm blessed. Look what I have. I'm blessed because of what I have. No, you have what you have because some of you were born on third base. I'm just going to be honest. It's about you were put in the right position. You may just be lucky. Now, you earned what you have. You worked hard. But there's a lot of people in the world that work really, really hard too for their life to be better. But they're trapped in systems they can't get out of. The reason I say this is because I think we have to get an awareness of this, that it's really easy to sit in here and to think about how this applies to us, but there's a lot of people in the world who are weary because of the weight of the world on them. And if we're going to be the church of Jesus Christ in this world, you know what we're going to have to do? We're going to have to, if we're going to love like Jesus, we're going to have to love our neighbor. And that means we're going to need to know our neighbor. You can't love your neighbor if you don't know your neighbor and don't know what load your neighbor's carrying. Well, the key here then is just to keep moving, isn't it? You may be able to hear this message and just take off and soar. And you may be able to run. And if you want to run, I'll meet at 7 a.m. at Saturday morning at Tulsa Runner for a 10-miler. No, thank you. Or you may be able to walk. Maybe all you can do right now is walk. But what's important is that you just put your hope in God and just keep moving. But for the person here this morning who can't move, who is so far down that they can't run and they can't even think about eagle's wings because they've had their wings pulled off of them, let me say this to you. This God that we have understands. And we want to understand. So if you can't walk right now, just let us carry you. We will be a church for you. Pray with me. God, thank you for the message you've laid on my heart today. Thank you that you are a God who gives us strength and power when we are weak. Thank you that you are the everlasting God, and we cannot praise you enough that you do care. Give us strength for the days ahead, strength for endurance and stamina to do and to be the people you've called us to be. We may not be Clarence Jordan, but we do have ground to till and to work to do. And for all those who today can't run, walk, much less fly, today we commit ourselves to them to be your church for them. We will carry those who cannot carry themselves. Give us the strength to do so. All God's people did say, Amen.